we are welcome the DMH and UCLA Prevention Center of Excellence. We have Denises Beasley, a curriculum developer, Dr. Lauren Marlott, who is a psychologist and director of learning and development, and Dr. McMullen, Laura McMullen, a clinical curriculum developer. Welcome you all.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we were just having
us.
We were just having such great conversation before this that we almost wanted to push record before. But yeah, let's jump right into it before we lose any more of it. I wanted to talk about the Center of Excellence, the Prevention Center of Excellence, and to any of you, I wanted to hear a little bit about the history of the center, why it started, and how did you personally get involved in this organization?
I can speak a little bit to the history. I was involved with UCLA at the Division of Population Behavioral Health before the Prevention Center of Excellence was created. So I can speak to that this has been a longstanding partnership between our director of the Public Partners for Wellbeing, Patricia Lester, and the director of the LA County Department of Mental Health, John Sharon. They've known each other for a long time, and I was first brought into UCLA to do trainings on our evidence-based practice called Focus, which is Families Overcoming Under Stress. And we did a lot of partnered trainings with LA County Department of Mental Health. And then slowly that kind of morphed beyond just the clinical setting into more community systems and community well-being. So eventually there was the public-public partnership created between UCLA and the county, and that essentially created our public partnership for well-being, of which the Center of Excellence is one of the UCLA partners. And our broad goals are to increase trauma and resilience-informed practices across all of LA County, and that includes every single sector of every single workforce. So it's a pretty big goal, and we have a pretty amazing team. And we do this through training, coaching, consultation, technical assistance. Some of that is on the ground and in person, and some of that is done virtually, and some of it's done through both virtual in person, and then some content that's also available on demand or asynchronously is another way to say that.
So great.
You want to talk about how you became a part of our work?
Yeah. Do you want to start? That was really, thank you, Lauren, for that. That just like so beautifully brought us into the present moment. Denises, did you want to start?
I'll start. So I started, I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I moved to LA because it was a dream. And I started working for LAUSD as a school counselor. And I did that for several years. And then I saw the position at the Prevention Center of Excellence to become a curriculum developer. And I applied just because I saw specifically they worked with LAUSD and just providing training, like Lauren said, we train and try to create systems that are trauma informed. And so I specifically was really interested in being able to make a bigger impact within the school system. That's my heart. And so that I've been able to do a lot of trainings with Lacoe and with working directly with teachers and educators and administrators within the school system.
Awesome. And how I came into it, I was at the time that I first, actually, Lauren was a big person in helping me bridge between worlds, because I was working in the teacher education program at UCLA, which is a social justice focused program. And I had gone through it 20 years ago. And then I taught in LA and New York City public schools, with the lens and the focus of working towards social justice through education. And so I had the pedagogy, I had the theory, I had the passion, I had the mission, I had the purpose, I had it all to be able to do this work as a social justice educator. What I didn't have at that time was any sense of self-care or tools or practices, or just even an awareness that taking care of myself as a teacher was an essential element in being able to show up for my students fully and to be able to respond to their needs. So what ended up happening to me is I ended up, kind of going through a burnout process by which I then realized like I need to step out of the classroom to see what just happened here, because I got really depleted. And so then I got a PhD in, I went into the PhD program to study teacher stress and teacher well-being, brought that into the teacher ed program as an advisor. So it was like this full circle for me where I went back into the teacher ed program and brought in the thing that I was missing, which is self-care, self-compassion, mindfulness, just the awareness of taking care of myself as a teacher. And then in that process, I was observing a student teacher in a classroom in Watts. And the kids were doing the Calm Classroom program, which is a mindfulness-based program. And I was like, oh my God, like they're doing something here around well-being for kids. And then that took me to look up to like, where's this program from? And it connected me to Kate Sheehan and then Lauren. And then we started talking about looking at the Focus program as a potential for teacher resiliency and seeing how we might be able to support. So then Lauren and I and Kate had this wonderful meeting, and I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing what they're doing with resiliency and well-being, generally. And then that's how I transitioned into the center, where I then started to shift away from teacher education and went right into the center and started to learn about trauma, resilience, informed care, and well-being for educators and all of that. So that was how I came into it. And Lauren was just a key person to help facilitate that transition from teacher ed into this work that we're doing. So that was a long story, but that's how I came into it.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack from just the three of you sharing about trauma informed, the goals of your organization to provide trauma informed practices to the whole county, to even a lot of you were talking about self-care and wellness for educators. And I just don't even know where to start to talk about it. But I mean, with this pressing global pandemic, it's been 2 years, and everyone knows, right, there's a need for self-wellness and self-care. Have you seen a lot of like trends or changes to how people have been utilizing resources, or are they more open to things now? Yeah, what kind of trends have you seen, like in the classroom or counselors, anything to that?
Well, I'm happy to just speak to that, and then I'll hand it off to my wonderful colleagues. I mean, when I was in the classroom, 10, 15 years ago, or however long ago, 20 years ago, there really was not, like, there wasn't in our cultural kind of collective sphere of conversation, like mindfulness was really like on the fringes, like it wasn't in the collective cultural awareness around well-being, And so I personally have seen the kind of evolution, having been in the classroom so long ago and what was not happening to what is happening now. There really has been a very powerful shift into, and I agree with you, Edwin, like the pandemic really kind of brought it into full focus around the need to integrate well-being in education. It's just as a fundamental, essential, foundational, sustenance for the humans doing the work, right? And so that wasn't part of the conversation. There was never PDs around this. It wasn't anything that was happening back then. And we're only talking about like a little over a decade ago or more ago. And so over time, and part of it, I think the mindfulness movement really has been supportive of a collective awareness, because now we have big companies, Google and Apple and all these, big companies. And there's just so much in every industry where the practice of mindfulness is integrated, because it helps with productivity, it helps with creativity, with stress management, et cetera. So it's kind of taken root in all these different industries. And of course, education is one of them. So that's one way that I've personally seen the integration of a well-being practice like mindfulness, meditation, breathing, slowly being integrated into our society and into our workplaces. And then we have such a strong, solid research base, empirical research base that supports all of this. So, we've just seen a skyrocketing in the research, quantitative, qualitative. So there's just, it's become an integrated part of our society now. And then with the pandemic, then the focus on well-being for educators has magnified social emotional well-being for students, et cetera. So I have, as a practitioner, seen the evolution, both as a practitioner and then as a researcher and a teacher educator, all of that. So I think to me, it gives me the greatest hope, to be honest, is that we are where we are, because it's just like an essential part of how we can keep moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Lauren, can you tell me a little bit about the resources that address what Lacoe was just talking about regarding wellness or teacher wellness?
Absolutely. So, I think to speak to your first question, I've seen a lot more accessibility of resources, both on our platform and in other ways. I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic has been that we've been forced to put everything virtual for safety reasons. And that makes it so much easier for many people to access ongoing professional development, and to access a wider variety of opportunities. In terms of the content that we have that fosters this, actually some of my favorite content features the folks that are on this call.
Oh, nice.
There's an interview series called Educators Overcoming Under Stress. It's a play on our focus, families overcoming under stress. We did a series of interviews on a wide variety of topics, a lot of which are still relevant even as we enter this endemic phase of the pandemic, because it talks about stress, because it talks about the racial injustices that have been happening and coming up in more and more conversations, the social injustices. And one of the interviews, Lauda is interviewed by another curriculum developer, Dominique Harrison, on educator well-being. And what I love about that interview is that it talks about ways that educators can support their own well-being and how that translates to student well-being. And not lying, even if Lauda wasn't on this call, two of my tools were developed from her interview. And this, again, not joking, I keep these on my desk. We develop, hundreds of things every year, but there's only a couple of things I can keep on my desk. Is this self-affirmation sheets. This is something that we talk about, teachers being able to use, of saying things like, I give myself permission to be imperfect, as well as a blank space to come up with their own self-affirmation. But you can easily see how this would apply to students as well, right? Like a student's having some anxious thoughts around taking a test. Well, the teacher could, just do some self-affirmations, encourage that before the test for everybody, not just for the student who's experiencing anxiety. And then this is also one of my favorites that came with it. It's called Navigating Uncertainty, right? So we have a picture of a educator here, but of course that could be a student also in that state. And then the idea is you pick one thing from this very extensive list that you can do of ways to ground yourself, ways to take deep breaths, ways to share something that you're proud of with a friend. These are great for students and educators alike. And then the other resource that I'll highlight is Denisha did a great video, which we turned into an interactive course. It's about an hour long on the pillars of trauma and resilience informed practices. And that is meant for every single learner on the Wellbeing for LA Learning Center to understand, what do we mean by that? Because A, it's a mouthful, and B, it's not exactly intuitive what that means. And then also has some interactions in the course to be able to apply this to your work life, your home life, different interactions that you have. So I think you were asking for two samples. Those are two of my favorites, but there's also a really robust search feature on our Learning Center, so that if educators have a specific topic that they want to learn more about, they can use that. And then we have a tagging system where it's like, oh, I really like this. This was about COVID-19. Let me click on that keyword and find out everything that's been tagged with COVID-19.
Wow, that's so much information. That's so great. Number one, I do want to link to some of those self-affirmation sheets, all those resources. I give myself permission to try, to fail, all those things. I absolutely love that. And I think our educators would use that with their students or for themselves or even in their own PDs. And then next, as you were talking about the stress and anxiety, that's actually what our school districts are asking for. That's one of their top needs when we're asking and talking to our school site personnel. They're like, yeah, stress and anxiety is actually a very common theme. So absolutely. I wanted to switch over and talk to Denisha and ask about if you have a different perspective of needs when you're working with counselors. We all, I mean, well-being, anxiety, stress is across the board, but if you can paint an extra picture of how it is with counselors, would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Laura, for for your shout out. The information that's on our learning community, I guess just personally, I actually can go on there and learn. A lot of times we don't understand. We may know what we're feeling, but we can't define it. We don't know how to, like, even when we say stress and anxiety, what does that mean? What is the difference between stress and anxiety, right? And so our trainings actually dive into that and give you not only strategies to overcome, but give you understanding of what you're experiencing, and it's validating. And that in itself can be helpful. In terms of like school counselors specifically, we actually have a learning community for all the school counselors in Los Angeles County. And so it's a place where we share resources. You can give resources, you can receive resources. You can also just have, someone to talk to, because what I do know just personally as a school counselor, a lot of times you are sometimes the only counselor in a school, or for your whole district. Sometimes there are only a few counselors, and it can feel very isolating when you don't maybe have someone you can run things by, or sometimes questions come up and you don't have the answers to them. I'm sorry. Someone's phone in my home is going off, and they're
oh my goodness, is it one of us?
Okay.
Has your stress level just gone up?
Yeah, my stress level went up because I'm a perfectionist and I always make sure my phones are off, and but anyway. But so let's bring it down. But as I was saying, sometimes as a school counselor, you may not have support, or you may have questions and you don't have anyone to even turn to for the answers. And so the community that we have on the LMS, as well as just the resources, are there to be a support to educators and counselors and the whole school community, parents as well. And so I think it's very collaborative, it's very informational, and very supportive, which is what I feel like we need in times of stress and anxiety.
Yeah, I love just looking at that chat function when Lauren is saying we can give ourselves opportunity and an ability to be imperfect. And so thank you for saying that. I heard a lot of resources. Denisha, you talked about the learning platform where the educators can come on and log on and use the resources. Lauren, you talked about some of the different handouts and the searchable function of the site. How do you see, I definitely see the counselors logging on and joining the network. How would you see, and maybe Loda, you could talk a little bit about how teachers could use this. Like if teachers are so busy, they're teaching, there's different things pulling from different directions, but all of a sudden there's this extra thing, right? And a lot of times when we go to professional development, it's like another thing, another teaching strategy, another thing. What is something that you feel like would be, if you could highlight like one or two that you were like, this is actually plug and play, this is actually something that's useful, as far as easy, how would you share that with teachers?
Okay, so that's a good question. There's two things that come to mind. there are so many resources in there, like Lauren said. And I would say, so if I'm thinking about it in two domains. So on the one hand, like if I put myself in the position of a classroom teacher, and knowing all the demands that exist there, knowing how like emotionally taxing teaching is, how intellectually demanding, how physically demanding it is. You know, you're one person and there you have a classroom full of 20, 30 students. All of those students have needs, very different needs. Some of them may have, you know, like a vast amount of, you know, strengths and needs. And then you're one person with also strengths and needs within yourself, right? And so as a teacher, there's a lot that we navigate. There's a lot of dynamics at play. And it can be exhausting and it can be inspiring and it can be empowering. And so because there's such a range of the experience of being a classroom teacher, and you know, generally teachers care so deeply about their students and they're there to be of service, that one of the things that can happen is that we just give to students, right? And so one way that I think the online center can be helpful is in moments where one starts to feel depleted, in moments when one starts to feel like, okay, I'm overwhelmed, I'm exhausted, you know, I have a student that is having all of these behaviors that I don't understand how to respond to their needs. I'm kind of at a loss for how to meet the student's needs, and I'm really tired, and I just made what feels like a big mistake, and now I'm like really hard on myself, right? Like these are the things that we experience. And so in those moments, it would be helpful to go on the online center and see, I would suggest typing in well-being for educators in the search feature. And then what's going to come up is lots of things like what Lauren was saying. Here's this, you know, little series of short videos. And like, as an example, one of the ones that we talked about, you'll see something like mindful self-compassion for educators. And so all of a sudden now you're like, oh, okay, so I can be compassionate to myself. What does that mean? Oh, and here someone's walking me through it. Like Denisha said, we walk through, you know, kind of a deeper dive on well-being practices and understanding them and tips for how to engage with them. So I think for me, that specific practice, by the way, mindful self-compassion, is a game changer for me, from my perspective. Had I learned mindful self-compassion 20 years ago, oh my gosh, like you know, it would have just really supported me in reducing so much stress, self-imposed judgment, self-imposed criticism, self-imposed perfectionism. I mean, I remember, you know, like there's so much that we do, that we carry, that's very self-imposed. There's some external things, but there's a lot that happens internally, self-criticism, et cetera, you know. And that had I learned about that early on, I would have been able to take care of myself internally, emotionally, you know, in ways that would have replenished my energy so that I would be able to be there fully for the students, and then model for the students how to be compassionate and kind, you know, when we fumble and when we don't do things like we would have ideally wanted to do. And so I think for teachers, you know, something like a practice like self-compassion for anyone, really for anyone, but you had asked about teachers. Self-compassion is a powerful practice. And so you can go in there and learn about it. There's tips and tools. Again, we start to practice for ourselves as the adults, and then we become models for our students. And then it's like, okay, so now I'm like developing some skills around emotional well-being and stress management and, you know, mindfulness and awareness. So I can be really present with my students. I can be, you know, I can find my way back to calm. I can find my way back to center, you know, so we just become more effective and maintain our well-being while managing the dynamics. And then so that's for the student, that's for the teacher, that's for the adult. And then what about the question about the student's needs? That's, you know, just lost a parent to COVID. And I know that. And so I'm seeing her or him in class day in and day out. They just lost their parent, right? So then it's like, how do I support the student that I love and care for? So I go on the online center and type in helping kids through COVID, grief in COVID, right? So I type in what I want, what I'm looking for, and there will come resources, experts talking about it, tips and strategies for navigating that situation. So that would be one example of how an educator could engage with the online center.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That self-compassion piece is real important. How often are we like more lenient and nicer to other people than we are to ourselves, right? How often are we looking at our own mistakes and just being ridiculously critical of ourselves? I can't help but to think, as we're talking about teacher and student support and wellness, that maybe the role of an administrator can actually help support that a little bit, as far as prioritizing wellness. And so my question is to Lauren about, or actually to the whole team, of if you think how you would, if there are any ideas of how you might use a specific resource or a specific video in like a professional development setting, or say you only had an hour or 30 minutes and you're meeting as an English department lead or something, something along those lines of like, hey, how do I make this a part of our culture, because there's just not enough hours in the day.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think lots of professionals have that that same struggle. Much of our content could be used in a professional development setting, and I could see it done a couple of different ways. Where if folks have some like independent learning time and they watch something and then come together to discuss it. But I could also see watching some of our videos or going through some of our materials as a group and discussing it. My trainer brain is now on fire. I'm like, oh, you could split up into multiple.
Right.
Each small group could have a certain topic, and then they search on the Wellbeing for LA Learning Center or other websites, and then they come back to a group and present what they found on that topic. But going back to the original idea, I could see a lot of our videos being watched as a group and having a discussion afterwards. The one that I think I'll talk about maybe specifically on educator well-being, maybe I'll talk about two. I'll talk about educator well-being first, which is we have a course that's a professional well-being regimen. It's done by Bill Nash, who's an expert in the field of moral injury and moral distress. And he basically gives a lecture on this model that he came up with on the importance of, he calls it ARMS. It's an acronym: assess, recover, mitigate, and strengthen. And he talks through why these are the things that are important to do, to identify what your protective factors are, identify what your risk factors are, try to strengthen your protective factors, try to mitigate your risk factors.
That's good.
And then he has a workbook at the end of it. So if you had an hour, you could watch the video, and then the next time the group could come together and work through the workbook together. And a small group of us from the Center of Excellence did this with Dr. Nash, and we got to go step by step of how do we assess what's leading us to burnout, what's stressing us out.
I like that.
How do we, try to figure out what's going to support us and what's bringing us down? And what are the things that we have control over, and what are the things that we don't have control over? So that's an example of, I think, promoting that educator well-being. And then some of our materials were actually created by DMH, and we worked in partnership to put them on the Wellbeing for LA Learning Center. One of them is we have some workshops that are meant for teachers to show to students. And what's really cool about it is that all the resources are there. The teachers don't have to do any kind of planning. But what I would do is, in a professional development time, is watch one of those workshops together and say, what do you anticipate might not go well? Or what do you think students will say in reaction to this? And then they at least get a taste of the workshops, if not watching all of them before they show them to their students. But everything's laid out. It's like a 10 to 20 minute video there's some resources and some discussion questions afterwards. And there's a couple of different sessions that cover all kinds of topics. The one I was just watching the other day was on healthy relationships, like a 15-minute video, and then a discussion on healthy relationships. So it's meant for like middle school, high school, and above, but that's something where the teacher doesn't have to do any curriculum development. It can be a way to infuse that well-being for students with existing materials.
Yeah, that sounds doable. I think that that's doable as far as even for a lesson plan, right? If you just want to play a video and have a written assignment or a class discussion, if you're online, it could be a breakout room and then a share or a Jamboard, right? I was like, oh, all these strategies are coming out. But yeah, thank you. That's super great. Was there anything you all would want to add? Any of you want to add that I didn't necessarily ask that you feel like might be super important to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I would like to add something, Edwin. Just in line with the question around administrator support and school-based opportunities for shared learning, like a PD or a grade level meeting or something like that. In addition to what Lauren had shared, what was coming up as Lauren was talking was, you know, when like, so we have lots of resources now, or I shouldn't say lots, but we have resources around responding to racial injustice, racial healing, and you know, Denise's like an expert on restorative justice and healing centered approaches to engaging in schools. And you know, her and I, we did a healing spaces for educators training that has some practice, that has, like, so Denisha goes over, I don't know if Denisha, if you want to speak to that a little bit, around just, you know, just dynamics, considerations, awareness, learning around racial dynamics in schools, and how to kind of create more healing approaches to engaging with each other, with students, how to repair harm, how to build, you know, healthy relationships. And then we had some like a relational well-being practice that we went over. So I could see, for example, you know, in a staff meeting or something where you know, where the topic is like, okay, we need to kind of respond here, but we don't know how to, that there are resources in our center for that shared learning, implicit bias and things like that. So I don't know, Denisha, if you want to speak a little bit about that and how that might be helpful.
Yeah, no, thanks, Lotta. I think a lot of schools are understanding the importance of using restorative practices. So we do have resources on the Learning Center on how to utilize restorative practices specifically in the schools. Also, just relationship building. During the pandemic, we know that students were separated from their teachers and from their school communities, and so that is even though they were virtual, a lot of that connection, that in-person relationship building was interrupted. And so how to restore those relationships is really important and something to think about. And as you mentioned, it's a ton of resources. There are so many different things. And like you said earlier, Lotta, if there's something that comes to mind, just go in the search engine and type it. And a lot of times something will come up. I personally do that as well.
Such a great resource.
Absolutely. And then I will also say, if, you know, folks have attended our trainings or watched our courses, or you're not quite finding what you're looking for, you can always reach out. And we're available for consultation if there's a specific question on how folks want to use resources, or if there's a topic that they're not finding great information elsewhere on and want to see what we have to offer. We can brainstorm some ideas of what we have that's existing and what could be created and done in a collaborative way. So we're available to answer questions and consult and brainstorm ideas of how to use this material. I think, you know, one of the key things is the model here isn't just to give information, it's to really use it and integrate it. And I'd like to use play with it. in our work and in our lives, so that it can become just the lens that we use in who we are and the work that we do.
Yeah, that's so great.
And
Thank
just
you.
to give, oh, sorry, Edwin, just to give
No,
a
no.
concrete example of what Lauren just said, I think that's so powerful, Lauren, what you just said about the integration of the tools and the practices and the lenses and, just as a quick concrete example, we have, for example, a tool called the feeling thermometer. And, and it's a visual of an actual thermometer, that can be, that somewhere, that there's an explanation of how to, use it, what it's for, but essentially that could be a tool at a staff meeting where everybody could go around and say, where are you on the feel, like what color are you on the feeling thermometer? So there's like from red to orange, yellow, and green. And that would be an example of learning a tool that's supportive of emotional awareness, a communication tool, and also emotional regulation, and just self-awareness of where we are, and also by being able to, for example, go around and let's just take 2 minutes to see where we are on the feeling thermometer. We will have had to learn about it, watch a little, 5-minute video explanation, print it out, have it around. And it's just part of the culture of that team where it's like, gosh, I'm really feeling orange, or I'm totally on red. And then my colleague is on green. Okay, now we kind of have a quick sense of what's the emotional landscape here on our team in this moment in time. So that would be an example of a tool that can be integrated simply, where there's a little bit of learning, there's the tool, and now let's play with it, let's practice it, like Lauren said.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. It's like we have to use it. We can't just look at it and not and let it go. So yeah, I'm excited to explore these tools too. I'm gonna ask for links too, so we can send them all and give examples and give your email addresses as well. Last thing, quickly, if you have one thing, how do you practice self-care? If you can only choose one or two things that you're like, hey, this is my go-to for self-care. Yeah, and and then Denisha, you want to go first?
Sure. I think I have a ton of things, but I've been being mindful of just making sure I'm doing things that make me laugh, or being like, if it means calling a friend who's really funny and making sure I'm having that conversation, or going somewhere that just brings joy, like even childlike joy. Sometimes I just go to like the trampoline place to like jump, because it brings out the joy. And sometimes it feels like the pandemic has kind of sucked the joy out of our society and our lives. Mm-hmm. So just doing things intentionally to instill joy back into my life.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Laura?
I love that, Denisha. I want to adopt that. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, but this is a really good example, for example, of introducing a possibility that maybe you're not thinking about. Like I wasn't thinking about doing something joyful as a self-care practice. I didn't really think about it like that until somebody like Denisha shares something like that. And then it's like, oh, wow, cool. Like I want to play with that. So that's just like an impromptu real-time example of how we learn from each other. And yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Denisha, for that. I think for me, I would say definitely meditation and breathing really helps me. And it does, it's literally like, let me just take like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And it doesn't feel like a chore. I think when it comes to meditation, depending on where people kind of come into it from or whatever, like, I think because I would consider myself a long time inconsistent practitioner. So not like every morning at 5:30, I wake up and I meditate for 30 minutes and I've been doing that for 12 years. That's definitely not me at all. But I know, for example, like I never even knew the word meditation when I was teaching, that I didn't even know what that was. It wasn't in my awareness. But I was trying to go to sleep, and then my mind was just racing. And I'm thinking about a conversation I'm going to have and how might it play out. And I'm so active in my mind It's like 4 a.m. And it's like, then I really am not sleeping. And literally it was like, I need to calm my brain down a little bit. It's kind of going crazy here. So that was my first conscious choice of just going to the living room, sitting down and breathing. I didn't call it meditation. I didn't know about meditation. It was just, I need to stop. My brain's going a little nutty here. Let me breathe. And so for me, that practice of just, I'm getting overwhelmed. Let me just pause and breathe. Even if it's 5 minutes, over time has become this like refuge, So now it's like, I'm feeling anxious. I'm overwhelmed. I'm just going to go into my car for 5 minutes and get into a quiet space and just close my eyes and breathe. Right. So for me, it's that. It's just pausing the hectic nature of the external world, getting quiet, going internal, and just breathing a little bit at a time, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long. So meditation and nature.
Yeah. Just giving ourselves the opportunity to pause and take a break is so hard. It's so hard to just pause. How about you, Lauren?
Well, I'll say, Denisha and Laura, I really enjoyed hearing what you do for self-care. I love walking my dog. Sometimes I'm not listening to anything and I'm just enjoying being in nature. Sometimes I'm listening to an audiobook or a podcast. Sometimes I'm talking on the phone to a loved one while I walk my dog. And then the other thing that I've been doing a lot in the last couple of months is texting a friend every single day. And it's sometimes to check in, it's sometimes to send a little joke or a meme. It's sometimes to say just, hey, I'm thinking about you and hope everything is going okay. And it's been a really nice way, especially during the pandemic, to stay connected with folks without having to find the time to have a longer conversation.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I just want to thank you, Denisha, Lotta, Lauren. I just appreciate you all for spending this time together to share about this resource. Looking forward to our continued partnership, and I will be sharing these resources. So yeah, thank you for your time.